James Huberty was born in Canton, Ohio on October 11, 1942. His father worked hard to provide for the family, while his mother focused on raising him and his sibling in a religious household, attending the local United Methodist Church. At just 3 years old, he contracted polio, which left him with a lifelong limp. Despite wearing leg braces for years to help him walk again, the disease had a lasting impact, resulting in a permanent limp that stayed with him throughout his life. In 1950, at the age of 8, a significant event reshaped their family dynamics. His father bought a farm in Mount Eaton, Ohio, but his mother declined to join them. Instead, she pursued a separate path as a Pentecostal missionary in Tucson, Arizona, leaving her family behind. This sudden abandonment affected him, and he struggled to cope with the loss. As a child, he was quiet and introverted, with few friends. He was fixated on target practice and became a skilled marksman. By his teens, he was a self-taught gun repair and modification expert. However, his awkwardness, strict religious upbringing, and preference for solitude made him a target for bullies in high school. Despite this, he earned average grades and graduated in the middle of his class in 1960. He began his undergraduate studies in sociology at Malone University in 1962, but soon switched to the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. He excelled there, earning his funeral director's license, graduating with honors in 1964. He furthered his expertise by obtaining his embalmer's license 3 years later, which enhanced his earning potential as a funeral director. By 1965, he had married a woman he met at Malone College and began working at a Canton, Ohio funeral home, showcasing his embalming skills. However, his shyness made client interaction difficult. He later left his job as a funeral director and embalmer and became a welder for 2 years. After that, he received a better paid position for a different company, which allowed a promotion and a better salary. By the mid-1970s, he was financially stable, and he and his wife moved into a 3-bedroom home in an affluent neighborhood. However, in the winter of 1971, the home was demolished following a house fire. Despite losing their home, he and his wife bought another house on the same street, built a 6-unit apartment building on their old property, and had 2 daughters in 1972 and 1974. Huberty did have a history of domestic violence against his wife and daughters. In one incident, his wife reported him to authorities, citing a severely injured jaw, but later downplayed the assault. Despite her efforts to get him to seek counseling starting in 1976, he refused therapy. On one occasion, his wife stated that she had gone to great lengths to manage his temper, anxiety, and paranoia, avoiding confrontations and controlling his behavior to mitigate the situation. To his neighbors, he was known for being moody, short-tempered, always fixated on his guns, and harboring grudges. He was known for having a volatile temper, lashing out violently at perceived wrongs, whether warranted or not. Neighbors even stated that their disputes with him even led to his arrest for disorderly conduct on one occasion. He was also known as a conspiracy theorist and survivalist who believed the government was out to get him. He also thought a catastrophic event like economic collapse or nuclear war was imminent and society would soon collapse. To prepare, he stockpiled food and amassed an arsenal, turning his home into a bunker ready for the apocalypse he was convinced was coming. In November 1982, his life took a devastating turn when he lost his good-paying welding job. The financial strain was crippling, and he felt like a failure as a provider for his family. A coworker stated that he told him that if he couldn't take care of his family, he'd take everyone down with him. As his unemployment dragged on, his mental health began to unravel. He started hearing voices and even threatened to fatally harm himself, but his wife persuaded him otherwise. He was able to find a temporary job, only to have the plant where he was working shut down 5 weeks later. Unable to find permanent employment in Ohio, they sold their apartment building in the spring of 1983. Shortly after, he was in a car accident with one of his daughters, leaving him injured. The physical pain and emotional turmoil took a toll on him, exacerbating his chronic neck pain and triggering worsening tremors in his hands and arms. By the summer of 1983, Huberty decided the family would be better off financially by moving to Mexico, hoping the money from selling their apartment building and home would last longer there than in the United States. However, they only received 25% of their home's mortgage value. By the winter of 1983, he had moved his family to Tijuana, Mexico, leaving most of their belongings in storage but bringing his gun collection, ammunition, and survival supplies. However, he failed to find work and regretted the move. Within 3 months, they returned to the U.S., settling in San Ysidro, a less affluent area of San Diego, next to the U.S.-Mexico border. In San Ysidro, the family rented an apartment while he job hunted. His rudeness to neighbors and annoyance at being the only Anglo-American family in the complex was evident. He completed a security guard training course in April of 1984 and got a job in Chula Vista. The money he made allowed the family to have their furniture shipped from Ohio, and they moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on Averill Road that same month. However, on July 10th, Huberty was fired due to poor performance and perceived physical instability. On July 15, 1984, Huberty confided in his wife about his growing concerns over his mental well-being. 2 days later, he called a San Diego mental health clinic and sought professional help, leaving his contact information with the receptionist, expecting a prompt callback. However, his anticipation soon turned to anger as he waited anxiously by the phone for hours, only to finally storm out of the house in frustration. Unfortunately, a simple clerical error. The receptionist had misspelled his name as Schuberty instead of Huberty, would significantly delay his chances of receiving help. Furthermore, the clinic, unaware of the gravity of the situation, mistakenly labeled his call as non-crisis and placed it on the 48-hour callback list. About an hour later, he returned home in a good mood and ate dinner with his family. After dinner, the family rode their bikes to a nearby park. Later that night, Huberty and his wife watched a movie together and went to bed. On the morning of the massacre, Wednesday, July 18, 1984, the family left their home on a trip to the San Diego Zoo. As they strolled through the exhibits, Huberty's mood suddenly darkened. He confided in his wife, expressing a sense of hopelessness, as if he felt his life was already over. Still simmering from the previous day's disappointment, he bitterly remarked, "Society had their chance," implying that the mental health clinic's neglect had sealed his fate. On their way home from the San Diego Zoo, the family stopped for lunch at a nearby McDonald's in the Claremont neighborhood and returned to their home. Shortly after returning home, Huberty entered his bedroom wearing a maroon t-shirt and green camouflage pants, while his wife was relaxing on the bed. He leaned over and said, "I want to kiss you goodbye." Not realizing the intent of his statement, she kissed him. She asked where he was going, since she planned to make dinner soon. He calmly responded, "Going hunting. Hunting for humans." With a rifle slung over his shoulder, a box of ammo, and a mysterious bundle wrapped in a checkered blanket, he glanced at his eldest daughter as he walked out the front door. His last words to his daughter were, "Goodbye, I won't be back." He casually walked to the family's black Mercury Marquis sedan, loaded up his gear in the trunk, and drove away. Witnesses reported seeing Huberty driving down San Ysidro Boulevard towards the Big Bear Market and then turning towards the U.S. Post Office, his intentions seemingly uncertain. However, at 3:56 p.m., he entered the parking lot of the San Ysidro McDonald's restaurant, only blocks from his apartment, where his rage and anger reached a boiling point. Unaware of the horror that was about to unfold, 45 innocent customers sat enjoying their meals inside the McDonald's restaurant. Huberty's vehicle contained a deadly arsenal: a 9mm Browning pistol, a 9mm Uzi carbine, a 12-gauge Winchester shotgun, and an arsenal of ammunition stuffed into a box in the bag. Huberty then burst into the restaurant, aiming his shotgun at a terrified employee. The assistant manager warned, "Hey, that guy's gonna shoot you," but his words were met with silence. The gun misfired, and as the manager approached, thinking it was a joke, Huberty fired his shotgun into the ceiling, then switched to his Uzi and fatally shot the manager. The gunman then turned and fired his shotgun at the employee, wounding him, while he shouted, "Everybody on the ground!" He unleashed a hate-filled tirade, targeting a specific group and hurled accusations before shooting victims. He falsely claimed to be a Vietnam War veteran, later proven to be false, and made exaggerated and disturbing claims about having already killed many people, with more to come. When a customer pleaded for mercy, the gunman fired 14 shots, screaming, "Shut up," with every pull of the trigger. As people fled in terror, the gunman targeted a group of 6 women and children. He fatally shot a young girl, then unleashed a hail of bullets on another, striking her multiple times and wounding her sister. The bullets also fatally hit a young girl protected by the body of her pregnant aunt, who tragically sacrificed her own life to shield her niece. Then, an innocent infant who was sitting next to his mother's body, sat up and began to cry, was fatally shot, leaving only one survivor in the group. Then the gunman turned and fatally shot a truck driver, and then targeted a family near the play area. Despite the father's efforts to shield his son's friend, the boy was hit multiple times but miraculously survived. The father struck 6 times, suffered devastating injuries but survived, while his wife and son were fatally shot. In a nearby booth, 3 women sought refuge, with the youngest shielded by her 2 friends. Despite their bravery, one friend was critically wounded and the other fatally shot, succumbing to her injuries the next day. A banker nearby was also fatally shot. Shortly after 4 p.m., the first distress call rang out, marking the initial plea for help in what would become a flurry of emergency responses.
712 William and 714 Wayne, Surfer at 245 just occurred at 400 West on Ysidro. I've got about 4 calls on it. 712 William. 712 North close. Surfer 712 North from close. It's supposed to be at McDonald's at 424 West of San Ysidro. It's a 245 shooting.
However, the dispatcher mistakenly directed responders to the wrong McDonald's, 2 miles from the San Ysidro Boulevard McDonald's restaurant, delaying a crucial lockdown and leaving civilians vulnerable. With no official warning, only those at the scene alerted others of the danger. A young woman and her daughter narrowly escaped by reversing her car and crashing into a fence after catching a glimpse of the gunman at the drive-through window. At 4:05 p.m., 9 minutes after the gunman had arrived, a family pulled into the McDonald's parking lot unaware of the danger. The gunman, mistaken for a repairman, critically shot and injured the mother and infant, leaving the father wounded critically as well, with life-threatening injuries. Despite their injuries, the family managed to escape. The mother handed their crying baby to her husband, who passed the infant to a young woman. She rushed the baby to safety at a nearby hospital, while the father tended to his critically wounded wife and himself, just managing to get them to a nearby building. Miraculously, all 3 survived. Other critically wounded victims tried to stem their bleeding with napkins, often in vain. 3 friends on BMX bikes then arrived at the west parking lot and hesitated as a bystander yelled something unintelligible from across the street. But before they could react, the gunman opened fire with his shotgun and Uzi, striking all 3 boys. One boy survived despite multiple wounds, but his friends were fatally shot. Next, the gunman turned towards an elderly couple entering the restaurant, fatally shooting the woman and critically wounding her husband. One witness described how the grief-stricken man cradled his wife's body, cursing at the gunman, who responded back with a vile oath and a fatal shot. By 4:10 p.m., 10 minutes after the initial 911 call, police arrived at the correct McDonald's location, with the first officer quickly assessing the situation despite the gunman's continuous fire, which even targeted his patrol car. Additional San Diego Police Department police officers arrived at the scene, cordoning off a 6-block area and setting up a command center 2 blocks away to coordinate the deployment of 175 officers in strategic positions. Within the hour, SWAT teams arrived, encircling the McDonald's to contain the violence. As the gunman's shots continued to ring out, police officers rushed to assess the situation, hindered by shattered windows and fears of a hostage situation. However, a brave escapee revealed the gunman was alone and targeting anyone in sight. Armed with this information, authorities authorized lethal force if possible. Exactly 69 minutes after the gunman's arrival, at 5:05 p.m., the order was given to neutralize the shooter.
Flight Commander.
Flight Commander, go.
He comes outside alone, they've got a green light. If he's inside with the hostages, they have a red light.
The gunman's bizarre behavior continued, which included tuning into a music station on his radio and dancing while shooting at survivors. He then stormed the kitchen, fatally shooting 3 employees and critically wounding another. A group of survivors, including 5 employees, a customer, and her infant, hid in a basement utility room, later joined by a critically wounded employee who had crawled to safety despite being shot 5 times. As a fire truck approached, the gunman fired, hitting the vehicle and grazing a firefighter. While he was shooting at the fire truck, a critically injured teenager in severe pain caught his attention, and with a cruel gesture, he fatally shot the teen, who collapsed beside his injured friend, neighbor, and a young woman. During a brief pause in the gunfire, the young woman who had been shielded by her friends earlier opened her eyes to see the gunman looming over her. He hurled a bag of French fries at her, then shot her multiple times with his shotgun, leaving her critically injured. Despite the severity of her wounds, she miraculously survived, requiring the longest hospital stay of any survivor. At 5:17 p.m., 1 hour and 21 minutes after the gunman had arrived, he made a fatal mistake by stepping into view of a SWAT sharpshooter near the drive-through window. A sniper on a rooftop across the street took the perfect shot from 35 yards away.
Suspect is down. Advising suspect is down.
Striking the gunman in the chest and severing his aorta. The bullet exited his spine, and the gunman fell to the ground. After neutralizing the gunman, the sniper radioed an update to his fellow officers, reporting the successful takedown. However, due to the chaos and multiple shots fired, the police couldn't confirm if there were other gunmen. At 5:18 p.m., a police sergeant cautiously entered the scene. Gun trained on the motionless body, he spotted a wounded girl hiding under a table, who confirmed the deceased male was the suspect.
SWAT team leader to all units, it is code 4 inside. Send in all paramedic units into the McDonald. It is code 4, suspects down.
Code 4, suspect down. All ambulances and motor units moving now.
The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre ended after 77 minutes, with the gunman neutralized. He had fired at least 250 rounds, killing 21 people, 17 inside and 4 outside. Victims ranged from 4 months to 74 years old. Only 10 people inside the restaurant escaped unharmed, with 6 hiding in a basement utility room. The tragedy left a devastating trail of shattered lives and unimaginable horror. The day after the tragedy, reporters visited the gunman's father in Mount Eaton, Ohio. He shared stories of his son's childhood and their strong religious beliefs, but was somewhat overcome with grief as he gazed at a painting hanging on the wall of a lost sheep by the Jordan River. He broke down in tears, expressing deep remorse for the victims and their families, calling it the worst day of his life. McDonald's paused all TV and radio ads out of respect, and in a surprising show of solidarity, their rival Burger King also suspended their advertising campaigns. Following the incident, the gunman's family received death threats, forcing them to flee the area. They relocated to Chula Vista, where the daughters attended school under assumed names, and later moved to Spring Valley in San Diego. The gunman's wife filed a lawsuit in July of 1986 against McDonald's and her husband's former employer, seeking $5 million in damages. She claimed that his rampage was caused by a combination of unhealthy food and toxic metal exposure at work. However, on July 25, 1987, the California Court of Appeal ruled in favor of the defendants, clearing McDonald's, the employer, and the San Diego Police Department of any wrongdoing or negligence. The traumatic event also affected responding police officers, causing insomnia, memory lapses, and guilt. A 1985 study by the San Diego Police Department's chief psychologist, supported by the National Institute of Mental Health, identified that several officers were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a lesser-known condition at the time. This research pioneered a better understanding of PTSD's impact on first responders. In addition, the San Diego Police Department reevaluated its response strategy and officer firepower after the tragedy. An officer's first-hand account highlighted the need for change, as he recalled feeling outgunned and vulnerable with only a .38 caliber revolver during the massacre. As a result, the San Diego Police Department enhanced training for specialized teams, upgraded to advanced weaponry, and improved overall preparedness to tackle similar crises. On August 2nd, the San Diego Police Chief held a press conference to share the findings of their investigation into the police response to the massacre. The investigation revealed that it took approximately 73 minutes from the first officer's arrival to neutralize the gunman. Although the SWAT team was delayed by heavy traffic, the police response was deemed appropriate and followed proper procedures. The police chief also rejected criticism that officers should have stormed the restaurant sooner. He cited the challenges posed by bullet-shattered windows, which made it difficult for officers to get a clear view of the gunman, especially in the bright sunlight. Additionally, he noted that the 8-minute delay between the order to use lethal force and the fatal shot did not alter the outcome. The chief maintained that the police handled the situation appropriately and took all necessary steps to minimize harm. Only 2 days after the tragedy, McDonald's planned to reopen the restaurant after swift repairs to resume business as usual. However, community leaders objected, prompting executives to reconsider. So on July 24th, McDonald's announced the decision to demolish the building, which occurred 2 days later. Subsequently, a new McDonald's has been built 2 blocks away on West San Ysidro Boulevard. In addition, McDonald's also donated the land to the city so that no restaurant would be built, and pledged $1 million to a fund supporting survivors and victims' families. The widow of McDonald's founder added $100,000 of her own money for funeral expenses, financial support, and counseling, totaling over $1.4 million in donations. However, controversially, the first payment from the fund went to the shooter's wife, despite objections from some San Ysidro residents and donors. After 4 years of discussions, the site was sold to Southwestern College in 1988, with the condition that a 300-square-foot area be dedicated as a permanent memorial for the 21 victims, finally honoring the lives lost in the tragedy. In 1990, a permanent memorial was dedicated at Southwestern College, located at 460 West San Ysidro Boulevard, on the site of the former McDonald's restaurant. The memorial honors the 21 victims of the massacre with 21 white marble pillars of varying heights, each bearing a victim's name. Designed by former Southwestern College student Roberto Valdez, the pillars represent the diverse ages and races of the victims, symbolizing unity and support in the face of tragedy. Notably, Albert Leos, who was 17 years old at the time of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre and survived, became a San Diego police officer, eventually serving the same community where the tragedy occurred, which had a profound impact on many lives, including his own. On May 25, 1979, the boarding process commenced for American Airlines Flight 191 at Chicago O'Hare's Airport. The aircraft on the schedule for the flight to Los Angeles International Airport in California was the McDonnell Douglas DC-10, which was state-of-the-art at the time. After all passengers were settled and the cabin secured, The captain was notified and the aircraft was then pushed back from the gate. The DC-10, a tri-jet wide-body aircraft, had been in commercial passenger service for nearly 9 years. Throughout this period, it had accumulated an impressive track record of over 20,000 trouble-free flying hours. American Airlines had operated the DC-10 for almost 8 of those 9 years. Captain Walter Lux, a seasoned pilot with 8 years of experience in the DC-10 since its introduction into the fleet, was in command. Additionally, First Officer James Dillard and Flight Engineer Alfred Udovic were both very experienced in the DC-10, accumulating over 20,000 flying hours specifically in the DC-10, making up the rest of the flight crew. Following the completion of the pre-flight checks, Flight 191 received clearance for takeoff. As it accelerated down the runway, and as the aircraft's nose wheel began to lift off the ground, engine number 1 on the left-hand side detached from the wing. The separated engine flipped over the top of the wing and rolled back down the runway. Despite this, the aircraft continued a relatively normal climb. However, moments later, it began an unexpected turn to the left. The events unfolding in the cockpit during the 50 seconds following the engine detachment until the aircraft impacts the ground remains unknown. The cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, lost power, with several other crucial system failures, including electrical issues and the failure of the number 1 hydraulic system. The cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, captured only one crash-related sound, a thumping noise. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, believes this noise corresponds to the engine detaching from the wing. Following this, a crew member exclaims "damn" as the crew quickly assesses the situation, and then the recording abruptly ends. The aircraft had climbed to approximately 320 feet above the ground, releasing fuel and hydraulic fluid from the left wing. The loss of hydraulics on the left side resulted in the leading edge slats becoming immobilized, causing the left wing to experience a complete aerodynamic stall. During this stall, the aircraft tilted to the left and rolled onto its side, a tragic moment captured in the most iconic photograph of the incident. Shortly after, the DC-10 crashed into a nearby field, approximately 4,600 feet from the end of the runway, carrying a full load of fuel. The impact was catastrophic, resulting in debris being flung into an adjacent trailer park, destroying 5 trailers and several cars. Alongside the 271 passengers and crew on board, 2 employees at a nearby garage lost their lives, and several others sustained severe injuries. The subsequent NTSB investigation identified the cause of the crash as an asymmetrical stall triggered by the loss of the engine and pylon assembly at a critical moment during takeoff. The separation was found to be due to inadequate maintenance procedures. In the days, weeks, and months following the tragic disaster, amid the collective grief for those lost, reports of eerie encounters began circulating to local police. Motorists described witnessing strange white lights flickering in the field where the aircraft had crashed. Initially, these sightings were attributed to souvenir hunters, but responding officers consistently found the field deserted. Residents of the trailer park, which was close to the crash site, also started reporting peculiar phenomena, such as knocking and tapping at their doors and windows. Notably, some of those individuals reporting these occurrences were off-duty police officers and firefighters. Upon investigating the sounds, they found no one in the vicinity. The bizarre incidents escalated to involve audible footsteps, door handles rattling, and even being turned. Certain residents asserted that they had opened their doors to find a concerned-looking man standing on their doorstep, urgently expressing the need to retrieve luggage or make a connection, only to witness the mysterious figure vanish into the darkness. Dog owners in the trailer park reported their dogs barking incessantly at an empty field where the crash had occurred, displaying behavior their own owners couldn't explain. Moans and cries were also reported emanating from the dark, vacant area. The unsettling occurrences prompted some residents to move away from the park, unable to endure the eerie phenomena. Nevertheless, newcomers quickly found themselves experiencing the same inexplicable occurrences. One man recounted walking his dog near the crash site when a young man approached, claiming to need an emergency phone call. Initially cautious due to the smell of gasoline and apparent smoldering, the man assumed that the young man had been running, and his body heat must have caused steam in the cold night air. However, when he turned away briefly to point out the location of the public phone and looked back, the young man had vanished. This encounter prompted him to reconsider the stories of paranormal activities following the crash, as he became convinced that he had encountered one of the restless souls from American Flight 191 that night. However, the stories of hauntings and subsequent personal accounts of paranormal phenomena and apparitions are not the only peculiar aspects of the ill-fated Flight 191. The designation Flight 191 has earned an unfortunate reputation as an ominous flight number. Aeroflot Flight 191, which crashed in 1963 during its final approach to Ashgabat International Airport, resulting in 12 fatalities. In 1967, X-15 Flight 191, an experimental test plane, disintegrated mid-flight, claiming the life of the test pilot. Prinair Flight 191 crashed in Puerto Rico in 1972, resulting in 5 casualties. American Airlines Flight 191 crashed in Chicago in 1979, causing a total of 273 fatalities. Delta Airlines Flight 191 met its tragic end during its final approach to Dallas-Fort Worth in 1985, with 137 lives lost. Comair Flight 191 crashed on takeoff while departing from the wrong runway in Kentucky in 2006, resulting in 49 fatalities. In 2012, JetBlue Flight 191 experienced a harrowing mid-flight emergency. During the flight, the captain was locked out of the cockpit and restrained by the passengers. The first officer first became alarmed when the captain started making disturbing statements regarding faith, questioning the accuracy of the destination airport, and asserting not to be held responsible if the plane crashed. Consequently, the first officer cleverly lured the captain out of the cockpit, locked the door, and changed the security code. Concerned passengers subdued the captain, using seatbelt extenders to restrain him. Fortunately, an off-duty JetBlue pilot traveling as a passenger assisted the first officer in the cockpit, and the plane safely diverted to Amarillo, Texas. While some may dismiss crashes involving similarly numbered flights as mere coincidence, the cumulative impact of these incidents has led to arguments suggesting that flight number 191 could be considered ominous or superstitious. Unmistakably, however, some airlines do not assign flight number 191 to future scheduled flights. On the evening of December 29, 1972, around 9:20 p.m., the crew and passengers of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 eagerly departed New York JFK Airport en route to Miami International Airport. The Lockheed L-1011 TriStar aircraft had recently joined Eastern Airlines fleet, having been in service for only 4 months. The flight crew included Captain Bob Loft, First Officer Bert Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Don Repo. Additionally, an off-duty Eastern Airlines employee, Technical Officer Angelo Donadio, was on board, returning to Miami after completing a company-related assignment in New York. The cabin crew comprised of 10 flight attendants attending to 163 passengers. The flight was uneventful until 11:32 p.m., when the aircraft began its final approach into Miami International Airport. As the flight crew completed the before-landing checklist, the landing gear lever was selected and moved into the down position. The crew expected to see 3 green landing gear light indicators illuminate, confirming that the landing gear was securely down and locked. However, although the 2 main landing gear lights turned green, the nose gear light failed to illuminate. The captain immediately requested a missed approach, and the first officer who was flying the aircraft at the time executed the missed approach procedure. Flight 401 was then given clearance by air traffic control to hold west of Miami International Airport over the Florida Everglades at 2,000 feet, allowing the cockpit crew to address the issue with the malfunctioning indicator light. Despite the captain's attempts to troubleshoot the malfunction by recycling the landing gear, it did not resolve the problem. The nose-wheel landing gear indicator light would not illuminate. Approximately 1 minute after reaching the designated altitude of 2,000 feet, the first officer activated the autopilot. From this moment forward, the cockpit crew members focused on addressing the issue with the malfunctioning landing gear light indication. The flight engineer, who sat behind the first officer's seat on the right side of the aircraft, was instructed to go into the avionics bay beneath the flight deck so he could visually confirm the position of the landing gear through a small porthole which was available on the L-1011 for just this reason. The off-duty technical officer occupying the jump seat accompanied the flight engineer. Regrettably for both the crew and the passengers aboard Eastern Airlines Flight 401, the cockpit crew's preoccupation with the cockpit light indicator triggered a significant chain of events. In a little over a minute, the aircraft had descended by 250 feet, a deviation sufficient to activate the altitude alert chime. However, there was no indication on the cockpit voice recorder later that the pilots acknowledged the altitude deviation warning chime. Within another 50 seconds, the aircraft had descended to half of its assigned altitude of 2,000 feet. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 had now descended to 1,000 feet above the Florida Everglades, and while the pilots tried to fix the challenge of the landing gear, this went unnoticed by any of the pilots. The first officer was first to see the discrepancy and said,
"Hey, we did some of the altitude here."
The captain, in disbelief, responded with,
"What?"
The first officer tried to clarify the discrepancy by asking the captain,
We're still at 2,000, right?
Confused about what his altimeter was telling him and what his altimeter should read, the captain replied,
"Hey, what's happening here?"
Within less than 10 seconds after this recorded cockpit dialogue, the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar jet crashed into the Florida Everglades.
"Hey, what's happening here?"
Nearly 19 miles from the end of the runway. The aircraft, traveling at a speed of 227 miles per hour, collided and crashed into the Florida Everglades just before midnight, leading to the tragic loss of 101 passengers and crew members. Upon impact, the aircraft continued traveling through the grass and water, breaking apart as it moved. The fatalities included 3 out of the 4 cockpit crew members, as well as 2 out of the 10 cabin crew members. And tragically, 96 out of the 163 passengers on board, leaving only 75 survivors. After analyzing the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, commonly known as the black box, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, reconstructed the moments leading up to the tragic end of Flight 401. According to their findings, a series of events transpired, initiating an unnoticeable descent that eventually led to the crash. The NTSB findings stated that the captain may have inadvertently moved the flight controls with his left knee while turning to his right to speak to the flight engineer, located behind his right shoulder, disengaging the autopilot altitude hold mode.
I think it's above the red one.
Yeah, I can't get it from here.
I can't make it pull out either.
We got pressure?
Yes, sir, all systems.
Put the damn thing on autopilot. All right. All right, approach control Eastern 401. We're right over the airport here and climbing to 2,000 feet. In fact, we've just reached 2,000 feet, and we've got to get a green light on our nose gear.
Eastern 401, roger. Turn left heading 360, maintain 2,000. Vectors to 9 left final.
Left to 360. What frequency did he want us on?
28.6.
I'll talk to him.
I'll put him on. Up to 2,000.
Eastern 401, I'll go out west just a little further if we can here and see if we can get this light to come on.
As a result, the first officer who was flying the aircraft at the time did not receive a visual deviation altitude alert on his flight control panel due to the autopilot configuration at the time. Nevertheless, at this point, the aircraft initiated a gradual and ultimately disastrous descent, The descent was so shallow that the flight crew likely wouldn't have recognized it. In addition, the audible altitude deviation chime alerting the pilots of the altitude change, which was behind the first officer at the flight engineer station, might not have been heard amidst the commotion in the cockpit.
You want me to test the lights or not?
Yeah, check it.
It's got to come out a little and then snap in.
I'm going to try it down one more time. You got a handkerchief or something so I can get a little better grip on this? Anything I can do with? Well, you got to push the switch just a little bit further forward. Now turn it to the right a little bit. No, I don't know. That's it. See if you can put that light out. Hey, get down there and see if that damn nose wheel's down.
Okay.
To hell with this. Go down and see if that red line is lined up down there. Don't screw around with that 20-cent piece of light.
Also, the flight engineer and the technical officer were both below the cockpit in the avionics bay, making it unlikely for them to have heard the chime as well. However, the crash was not the end of the story of Eastern Airlines Flight 401. In the months and years that ensued, undamaged parts of the aircraft were salvaged and repurposed in other Eastern Airlines L-1011 aircraft. In addition, investigators began to unravel the tragic chain of events that culminated in the disaster, solving the puzzle of the malfunctioning nose landing gear light indicator. Simply 2 burned-out light bulbs in the landing gear light assembly. In the aftermath of the crash, reports emerged over the months and years of flight attendants, crew members, and even passengers claiming to have encountered apparitions of the deceased crew members of Flight 401. These ghostly figures began to manifest themselves only on other Eastern Airlines flights, particularly on those flights whose aircraft carried the salvaged parts from Flight 401. Sightings of the ghost of flight engineer Don Repo and Captain Bob Loft became widespread within Eastern Airlines. Many Eastern Airlines employees and even passengers reported experiencing flickering lights, strange sounds in the cockpit, and sightings of other crew members who had tragically perished on Flight 401. Despite skeptics dismissing these accounts as grief-induced hallucinations, the stories persisted, with tales of ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences that have become integral in aviation folklore. Initially, Eastern Airlines hesitated to acknowledge the supernatural occurrences, but mounting pressure forced the airline to address the haunting. Ultimately, the salvaged components were removed from all Eastern Airlines aircraft, leading to a decrease in the reported sightings. Notably renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren have included pieces of Eastern Airlines Flight 401's wreckage in their occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut. However, the echoes of Flight 401 still resonate in the collective memory of pilots, flight attendants, and even passengers who continue to venture into the once haunted skies. The story of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 endures as a chilling reminder that at times the boundaries between the living and the dead are not as clear as we may think. That's all for now. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It really helps out the channel. And let us know if there are any stories that you would like us to cover in the future. Until next time, thank you for watching.